Welcome back for week 3 of tips for stress reduction. In this week, we're going to be covering the basics of movement for stress reduction. And before we cover each tip individually, we're going to talk about the overarching theme of enhancing movement variability. So what exactly is movement variability? Movement variability describes the small changes in movement that occur around a given task, and this is healthy and normal. And so a good example of this is if we're shooting a basketball, we know we want the ball to go through the hoop, but we want to be able to go into and out of that shot in a variety of ways. So we don't want to have to walk up in just one way and be very rigid in the way we shoot this. And when it comes to our other movements in life, we also want to be able to, yes, achieve the desired output that we need to achieve a movement task, but we don't want to be rigid in the way that we have to do that. So without further ado, let's get to tip number 1, which is to perform restorative movements daily. So we talked a little bit last week about posture, and I think this is a good place to do a little quickie refresher example. So we talked about how some people prefer to slump when they sit, and that's one strategy. And so when you do that, you may lose this ability to achieve a little bit more upright position. So in order to restore that, an example of a restorative activity you might do is something like an overhead reach, because it's going to actually expand the front of the body and reduce some of that restriction that's created by spending a lot of time in that type of position. So other examples might be, let's say, if you're this person who's extremely upright, if you did something like a child's pose or a rocking activity to reduce some of the compression on the back side of the body, that's another example of restorative movement that can, again, either maintain or enhance that movement variability. Tip number 2 is to walk or jog at least 30 minutes a day. And the reason why this is so important is that as humans, the way we move is dependent on this rhythmic, alternating, oscillatory kind of function. And we actually have parts of our nervous system called central pattern generators that hardwire in this type of movement. So this is things like breathing and walking. And so if we go out and we have a nice walk or a nice jog, we're going to be achieving both of those things at the same time. This is going to be acting on similar parts of the brain that are actually going to be associated with the stress response. And this is also going to give us an opportunity to think and clear our head, or to stop thinking and let go of some of the thoughts that we're thinking about throughout the rest of the day. Number 3 is to balance activities such as strength, cardio, and mobility. So we tend to do things that we're good at. So if we're a strong person, we spend a lot of time doing strength, and we might skimp out in the cardio or the mobility. If we love to run, we may not do the adequate amount of strength training. And so if we overemphasize one type of activity, we don't get that variability that we need. So if you're that person who does a lot of mobility stuff, but maybe needs a little more strength, just build a little bit of that in, and I think you're going to notice that you get a reduction in stress that goes along with that. Number 4 is to include fun activities. So this could be yoga, sports, or dancing. I think a lot of times we're taking very seriously the movements that we do, or we just don't like to exercise at all. So that becomes a barrier to exercising as well. And so what we want to do is we want to include things that we like to do, or that we're not having to take so seriously. So if you're on the performance end of the spectrum, you're probably taking things maybe a little bit too seriously to get something fun. If you're that person who doesn't like to exercise, you may need to do something fun to motivate you to actually move a little bit. And so things like dancing or yoga, things where there's a social component, sports are great, but where there's not a high degree of competition, where it's just a pickup game or something like that, are great ways to build in that part of the nervous system that's going to help reduce stress, promoting that social sense of well-being with others. Number 5 is to practice complete stillness. And this one might be counterintuitive, but when we think about the full range of movement that's available to us, we could be moving in a sport where we're going all out, and that's like the most activity, the most movement. At the very opposite end of the spectrum is complete stillness. And I think a lot of times we're not using this end of the spectrum because we're go, go, go. We have 1,000 things to do, and maybe we love to move, and maybe that's kind of how we burn off that extra energy. But the question is, can we actually bring our nervous system down to the point where it's just totally calm, and we don't have to be in that state of constant motion. And so you don't have to do this a lot. We're going to cover meditation in an upcoming video, so stay tuned for that one. And we'll talk a little bit how to build in these little breaks of stillness throughout the day, because as you restore this end of the spectrum of stillness, that's going to help balance out this end of the spectrum of movement. So stillness is still movement, and that's tip number 5. So thanks a lot for watching this video. Again, we're going to do all these tips. Hopefully we're going to get a restoration or improvement in our movement variability. And stay tuned for next week's video. We're going to be talking about the basics of meditation. See ya.